Thanks for making it through the day 2 of the summit. We're going to have a really exciting panel for you guys today on data security. We think there's a tremendous opportunity here to really build a category king. And we'll talk a bit why that is, what drivers are leading to that, et cetera. But you think about other spaces, there's a king of identity, arguably right in Okta and endpoint with CrowdStrike, et cetera. And so what's the market opportunity here? Who better to speak to that than 3 very accomplished entrepreneurs I'll mention in a minute, all tackling this from very different perspectives. And then we also have a investor, ex-Forrester analyst, and Fortune 500 board member. So really excited to kind of delve into this today and hope we get some insight into what are the takeaways to build this platform in this space. So maybe Chinxi, I'll start with you. Can you just tell us, 60 seconds, like what do you focus on? What are you seeing out there in data? And we'll kind of go down the line here.
60 seconds? Okay.
We'll give you 90.
You guys all get a prize for staying this late, just saying. My name is Chinxi Wang. I'm the founder and general partner of Rain Capital. We're a cyber-focused venture fund. But I also sit on the board of Fortune 500 company, critical infrastructure, so we talk about data security all the time. And my background is cybersecurity research, so very happy to be here.
Fantastic.
Dan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Dig Security. We're a cloud data security company. We help organizations protect their data on AWS, Azure, GCP, and Snowflake. Pioneers of a category that is now booming called data security posture management, and data detection and response, which Howard is going to talk about as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Howard Ting, CEO of Cyberhaven. My company is really focused on protecting data from theft and misuse by insiders. So whenever users act on data, that's where we would play there. My background, I was one of the very early employees at Palo Alto and helped take that company public. And then I was a CMO at another public company named Nutanix from early days through its exit. And then I've been also a CMO at Zscaler and Redis before becoming CEO here at Cyberhaven.
I'm Simon Taylor, CEO and founder of Haiku. Haiku stands for Hybrid Cloud Uptime. We're the world's fastest growing backup as a service company. Serial entrepreneur, started my first company, sold it to a company in Europe, second company sold to Citrix, and now I'm at Haiku. We've raised about $140 million in the last 2 years with a very simple thesis, which is that there are 17,000 SaaS services in the US. Only 5 of them are actually protected by the Gartner Magic Quadrant for data protection. Only 5. We are in a world of trouble, and that's what Haiku is here to solve.
Thank you for that. Thinking about some stats here, we see, if we look at ransomware stats, right, everyone knows it's a prevailing issue in the industry. That costs on average of $9 million for a large enterprise in cleanup costs, ransomware, and related costs. We have, 200 million folks had their information leaked through data breaches last year. And then we see these, crazy amount of fines that are happening to, Meta in the news for 700+ million, but many others that are sort of less reported. So we know it's a problem, but Dan, maybe I'll start with you. Why hasn't there been a large leader in this space? Is it just the why now? Or is it technology reasons? Is it something else? Can you just kind of give us high-level lay of the landscape?
Yeah. So typically, enterprises have data in 5 main locations: endpoint, email, on-prem, SaaS, and public cloud. And I think that we kind of reached an inflection point of data moving from on-prem to the cloud. 60% of the world data is now sitting in public clouds, and that is kind of the largest growing segment today of data security. And up until now, this fragmentation didn't really exist. But today, a typical enterprise will have at least 20 different types of data stores and thousands, if not thousands, of data store instances across their AWS and their Azure and their GCP. They started running across multiple clouds because they buy companies. They have different teams that are operating and experimenting with different types of cloud technologies. And the number of data regulations has kind of come into this space quite significantly. I think we kind of first see FTC safeguards, which is now kind of putting data security controls into the market. So I think we're now seeing kind of this boom of data security companies for the public cloud that help organizations kind of answer 3 main questions. What data do we even have across our public clouds? How is that data being used? And of course, how do we protect it, either at rest or in motion?
And maybe just kind of piggybacking off that, I mean, Chinky, who's driving this? You work with, you're on a Fortune 500 public company board. You're an investor. You're an advisor. Like, who's driving this, like, inside of an enterprise? Like, whose responsibility is this when you see the things in the news, et cetera?
I think there's a number of factors that at play here. He talked about some of the regulations. The White House just issued another requirement document, and the SEC is increasing its requirement on boards' oversight in security. Within enterprise, what you hear about is the boards asking, what is the I'm giving you this budget, what are the assurance that you're giving me, right? And we're asking more and more about not just evidence like in the report manner, but with the new regulations, we're seeing that companies are being asked to provide continuous evidence, right? So just not bringing a pen test and generate a report. Rather, everybody's going to be building dashboards. Everybody's going to be providing this continuous, any point in time evidence so that regulators can come in, assessors can come in, and also in public companies, we're driven a lot by the rating agencies. The rating agencies will come, and all these are generating conversations in the boardroom about data security and data protection.
And so you guys are both really talking about a lot of the kind of external agencies, a lot of the external factors, and I think this is really a super interesting way to kind of view it, of almost like top down from the outside. And at the, maybe Chinky, just kind of to ask a little bit more, like, who's responsible for this, like, on boards? Are there committees? Just kind of work us, down from the org.
Very good question. So cybersecurity risk, some companies have it roll up to audit committee. Audit committee traditionally deals with financial risks, but now technology risks could be in audit committee, or it could be a separate committee called the Tech Risk Committee. So it's depends on the company, right?
Sure. And Simon, how does that jive with what you're seeing?
Jed, can I add one thing real quick?
Please.
So
Yes.
you've touched a lot on the external attacker, and that's what we read about in the press a lot, a big breach of PII, PCI data, whatever. But that's not really the bigger part of the problem, I would argue, because the analogy I always use is that's like a pipe bursting in your house. Like, obviously, it gets a lot of attention. You swarm on it. You deal with it right away. Everyone knows about it. It's a big, noisy event. And you lose a little bit of water. But you deal with it right away. And hopefully it happens once every 10 years. But there's a lot of leaky faucets in those homes that are leaking water every day. And in the fullness of time, that leaky faucet, you're losing a lot more water. That's the insider attack. That's the insider leaking data. Like, all the employees that are going to start new companies, taking IP with them, the Chinese espionage agents that are in these companies stealing data, which we read about in the Times and many articles over the years, right? The whistleblower that wants to expose something that your company's doing that they don't agree with. There's so many forms of insider attacks, and I think that's actually the bigger problem.
And how should we as investors, other folks think about that? Is insiders X% of the problem? I mean, it's hard to kind of get these numbers, but how would you kind of rate it from a priority standpoint?
I mean, I think what we're seeing is certainly that, and I agree with Howard. And by the way, it's very funny to be sitting up here with Howard. I was selling to Howard about 10 years ago, and now we're up in this panel together, so I love you, brother. Yes. It's great to be here. When I think about it, about 80% of data loss today is based on human error inside the organization. Howard's exactly right. I think what the
error meaning accident.
Error meaning, my friend, my admin Jim brought his son in to be an intern for a week. He accidentally deleted a week's data. I then reached out to the vendor and asked to recover it. I wasn't able to recover it, and now that data is completely lost. We have to start over again. I think a lot of times we overcomplicate what data loss actually means. Data loss is not just terrorists in China, although it is that. It's not just when the Boston Children's Hospital was hit by Iranian terrorists, although it is that. Data loss is very simply the idea that we have data silos now that are sprawling across our organization. So I always think about, if you go 20, 30 years ago, my father was a CIO of a company, and his job wasn't that complicated. I wouldn't say that to him. But if you think about his data environment, it was like a 6-sided dice. He had some data on-prem, maybe he had a mainframe, maybe they were experimenting with Salesforce. Well, now you go 10 years later, all of a sudden the average company has their data in 50 or 60 places. Today, The average mid-market company has their data in no less than 212 different silos. And if we can't recover end customer data quickly, then what are we doing? What are we doing? You know, we've actually let the ball drop. We've stopped helping our customers to protect themselves. And I think in the data protection space in particular, there has been a fascination with chasing TAM, because we need to raise money. You know, but I think what we ultimately all forgot is that there is an aggregate number of SaaS vendors out there that have to be protected. And until we protect all 17,000, until we create a safer space, these ransomware attacks are going to keep happening.
Yeah, one of the problems with data security is, you know what data is? Data is like rabbits. Do you know why data is like rabbits? Because they multiply. Right? You have maybe one database, soon you have 15 databases, soon you have hundreds of databases. So not every organization, in fact, maybe not a single organization would know all their data, where they are and what they are. So that's a big problem. Inventory visibility is a big problem. Once you get that, then you have to say, how do I protect it? How do I give right authorization, access rights to both insiders and outsiders? And those are all problems. But if we don't even know what data we have and where they live, and it's a big problem.
Sounds like a great setup for Dan. Like, Dan, who do you engage with in the organization? Like, do they know what they have in the cloud? Are you helping them find that?
So I would say that 85% of the organizations have zero idea what data they own, and I think that's kind of the initial start of any data security project in the cloud today. Especially as they migrated from on-prem, they just lifted and shifted everything, and then they say, okay, now what, right? So typically we work top-down from the CISO organization. If the organization has a data security team, and we'll talk about kind of the emergence of data security teams soon, but if they have a data security team, we always work with the data security team. If they don't have a data security team, I would split it between 25% cloud security and 25% GRC. GRC is a big factor in this specific space. How do we comply with the different regulations that we need to essentially adhere to, whether it is PCI or HIPAA or SOC 2, FTC safeguards. Each country has their own different types of privacy regulations. Each state is now having different types of privacy regulations.
Yep.
So our goal is to help these organizations reduce risk, both from a compliance standpoint, but also from a security risk, because the cost of a data breach is super high, not only in monetary standpoint, but also in time. I talked with a CISO that had a massive data breach, I think about 3 weeks ago. He spent 3 months actually just recovering and doing all the different reporting that he needed to do, making sure that...
I see Simon leaning in, wondering who that is.
Always.
Yeah, definitely. So data security teams, GRC, and cloud security, and we always kind of work with the CISO team to essentially establish that.
And how is that similar or different to your process?
Yeah, we sell to the security team, you know, the folks that are focused on protecting data. We also sell to insider risk teams because we really uniquely address that problem. And I would say that, you know, there are new use cases all the time. My favorite use case right now is ChatGPT, right? This is like what Simon's saying about accidental or, you know, non-malicious usage. We have doctors that want to generate claims letters for their patients so they can save 5-10 minutes of their day, give better patient care. But in order to generate that letter, they have to upload a lot of sensitive data into ChatGPT. Well, that doctor probably is not aware that an attacker can go query ChatGPT and ask, what's the health information of Howard Ting? And ChatGPT may give the answer back. Because for the first time, we have a system like that that is actually training on your data that you submit. They have ownership of all the data that's submitted. Most of the people using ChatGPT do not know that. We published an article.
Every single thing you give to them, it's their property, and they're using it to train their model.
Yeah, we published an article last week based on research in our customer base for a large-scale company of 100,000 users. In a single day, we're seeing thousands of incidents where sensitive company data is being put into ChatGPT. All that data is being sucked in by OpenAI, and they're using it however they want. And very bad outcomes could occur from that.
I think this is another example of these data silos, right? So again, we talked a lot for years. The last almost 10 years, the whole grow at all costs world was about how much data you could get your hands on. Didn't really matter what you did with it, didn't really matter how you got it. Get the data, monetize the data, get the data, monetize the data. I think for the first time, the world has sort of paused. And I think what Chenzi said about the Biden White House letter that came out, this is going to have real-world repercussions on every one of your portcos. Because anybody who is running a SaaS service right now is suddenly going to be liable for their customers' data usage. That's a big shift. That's a really big shift. Now, the good news for you is that they don't actually need to protect the data themselves, but they have to provide options, and they can't bury their head in the sand. They have to disclose from this point forward, we're not backing up your data shared responsibility model. Microsoft has had that in their contract for about 10 years with Office 365. It mysteriously moved from page 14 to page 1 after that letter came out. So, the litigation is going to start, whether we have GDPR or not. People who lose their data are going to get mad. It's the SaaS vendors they're going to get mad at, and we have to be prepared.
The challenging thing about this problem, and one of the reasons why we haven't seen big breakout successes, this is an incredibly difficult problem to solve. You heard a lot about where the data needs to go, but and I heard this analogy, data's like rabbits, which is the first time I've heard that. Thank you, Chenxi. I've heard data's like gold, uranium, et cetera, but my favorite analogy, data's like air. It has a natural affinity to want to fill up the container that it's in. And the enterprise container today is vast. SaaS apps, remote workers, supply chain partners, generative apps. Like the data just wants to flow, and it's being copied and shared, and if you don't allow that, you're at a competitive disadvantage. Your competitors are able to collaborate, build better products and services, learn about their customers better. They have a very big advantage over you if you don't let that data flow. So the need to let that data flow, be used, be shared, and still protect it and make sure it's not misused, that's an incredibly tough problem to solve.
So imagine you mentioned that kind of coming in a lot of times, many of you through CISO organization. What about like the data platform owners, the people who own more the CDO side of the house? How do they interact? Are they an influencer or buyers? They try to prevent this from happening?
Well, I would say COVID changed the game, right? I think when I started in the data protection space, I was not the person everyone wanted to dance with, right? I mean, I think data protection was sort of a very uninnovated space. COVID happens, ransomware attacks go off the charts, all of a sudden we become a first-class citizen, right? And the reason was not because the technology necessarily got better, ours did, of course, but it's really because the boards started to pay attention. The boards started to demand of their C-suite that there was a plan in place in order to protect them from a recovery perspective. One of the things we did early on is we created something called R-Score, getarscore.org. It's a completely free public service. And we basically put it out there and said, you should get almost a credit score that tells you how likely you are to be able to recover from a ransomware attack. 35,000 organizations have now taken this assessment, but what's amazing about it is that almost every branch of the federal government did as well. And so I think sometimes we have this belief that our data is protected, that at least the government must be okay. Nobody knows this stuff. This is completely new territory for everybody. And I think it's on us as vendors to try to make ourselves and avail ourselves of these problems and actually provide more paths to solutions.
I agree that from the board level, right, once the board has that realization, then things trickle down from there. But there are two things that are really important to know. How do you think companies typically dealt with data breaches in the past? 2 words, cyber insurance, right? And today, what is happening is insurance agencies are walking back coverage on cyber incidents. Once you take that crutch away and increase the regulations, and SEC is asking companies to disclose in their quarterly and annual filings on their cybersecurity control, all these things, then you're like, holy shit, we've got to do something, right? So that's where I think this whole industry has significant tailwind behind it.
There's another piece to that I completely agree, by the way. The cyber insurance piece was the cop-out forever. It was, I have cyber insurance. I was talking to Kevin Mandian about this a couple of months ago, and he revealed this to me, and I thought it changed the game for me. He said, we've done a lot of analysis, this is me quoting him, on where these attacks occur, and most of the attacks are focused on areas, industries, countries where they know they're insured, because they know the insurance company is going to pay. So rather than seeing cyber insurance as a panacea that is going to fix this for your portcos and you're just exposed to more risk. You have to have your own plan in place.
And maybe talk a little bit about, is this a U.S. problem? Are you guys focused on the U.S.? Are you guys focused like globally? You mentioned a lot of the regulations, GDPR in Europe, kind of the SEC has a few. How much of this is a U.S. problem versus something that's more international?
Well, like I just said, so we've got 3,600 customers in 78 countries now. And what I would say is that the more developed markets are going to get hit because of what we just talked about, the cyber insurance. They know where the money is. They know where the money is. But I will say that it is a completely global problem from a scale perspective. I think there's 13 or 14 nation states that leverage Haiku in some shape or form. Trust me, ransomware protection is chief among their concerns in every one of those conversations.
Absolutely. And Dan, what do you see? I mean, you're maybe a little bit earlier stage than some of the other companies out here. Have you decided to focus in the U.S. and Europe? How do you think about go-to-market?
So we mostly focus on the US, and that's just because cloud adoption in the US is the highest. Second after that is Europe, and then kind of trickles down around the globe. Most of our sales team is here, and we kind of are opportunistic in other locations around the globe. And typically, I completely agree with follow the money. The Americans essentially have the money to pay for a data breach that is essentially happening. But in Europe, there's a good kind of push just because of GDPR. So the large organizations over there already have a data security team. They had a data security team for a while, and they've been looking for actual products. And they didn't have products to essentially serve them in the public cloud. So I would say US is kind of our primary focus, but then after that, Europe is great second.
And are most organizations, I mean, there's Fortune 500, Global 2000, obviously gets bigger out of there, but still a lot of household names. Are they ready for these solutions today? Do they need to clean up internally?
So as long as they started running in the cloud for the past couple of years, they have a lot of debt, right? So whether it is orphan snapshots or processes that essentially are running in their environment that they're unaware of. I'll share kind of one example. We onboarded one of the largest banks in the US. And we found out that for the past 3 years, every single day, all their financial reports were being copied to an external AWS account that doesn't belong to them. Now, how can something like this even happen? Because no one really monitors how data is being used after permissions have been given. We don't have the right tool sets. So organizations are looking for kind of this DLP for clouds approach of how do we essentially protect our data in the public clouds. And up until now, there wasn't really good solutions. We had solutions on-prem, we had solutions on endpoint, we had solutions for SaaS, we had CASBs. But we didn't really have any proper solution that was offered by the clouds, and especially now in a multi-cloud environment, it just became impossible. And I think that's where we kind of saw this boom of data security posture management, data detection and response in the public cloud, this kind of big shift of like venture capital into this space as well, because we're seeing kind of this big market demand in the space.
Maybe if I can kind of just do a follow-up there. I mean, I think one of the issues as investors is there's a huge opportunity here. We know it's going to be big very soon. But how do you kind of slice and dice the market? I know we were talking earlier, you had a few opinions on this topic.
Depends on what you mean by slicing and dicing, right? So data security, I think as a market is a long time coming. It used to be only encryption, nothing else. And now you see things like posture management, you see discovery and inventory. They're all projects people are willing to spend money on. Now, how large is the market? I think it's still just beginning. Right? We have and think about the privacy laws. CCPA got updated, right? We all live in, well, those of you who live in California, you should know. And then after that, 5 other states established their own privacy laws, and 20 other states going to follow. So all of these going to engender requirements for companies to do things differently. And that is contributing to the market.
Look, there's no question. The data security market has to be the largest segment in cyber. Has to be, right? Because what else matters to protect? Right now, we spend all our money protecting our devices, our networks, even the cloud. Like, what is all that? That's all commodity stuff that we rent. How many of you paid to secure your room here? Or the Uber that you took? You don't pay to secure things you rent. You pay to secure the things you own. What do organizations own in the long run? They own data. That's it. Data and identities, which is data. That's it. Everything else is rented. So there's no question in my mind, the next 10 years, data security will be the largest segment in cyber, and a lot of big winners are going to get created.
I'm going to add to what Howard said, though, because the problem, I think, Howard, is that we're taking all the data that we own, and we're putting it on somebody else's truck, train, or bus, and it's getting shipped out. Because 70% of software purchases now are SaaS. We're not buying on-prem anymore. Public cloud is the biggest, and I'm not disagreeing at all. But the reason it's the biggest is because all the SaaS vendors are using it to put their data into it, right? And so I think the challenge is with so many of these vehicles going in so many directions, we've got no control over it, and I think that it is incumbent upon us to fix that problem. Yeah. Just to also answer your question about how we slice and dice the market, I always think about PDR, prevention, detection, recovery. And I think the P and the D get a lot of attention, and they should. It's incredibly important and critical, but we always say it's not if, it's when. It's not if you're going to lose your data. It's not if you're going to get attacked. It's when. And you can dig the moats deeper. You can build the walls higher. But at some point, you've got to have a recovery strategy. You've got to actually be able to get your data back and fix the problem.
Look, fundamental to PD and R is classification. That's where the whole data security industry has been broken for decades. Mm-hmm. I started my career in 2000 at RSA, and for 2 decades, we've struggled with classification. How do you know what data is sensitive? And so you can apply appropriate policy. Our state of the art to classify right now is to scan the content, look for patterns in the content. That doesn't really work. How do you know that that's your source code versus open source? How do you know that's your 3-year financial model versus the street model? How do you know that that's the new the CAD drawing, your forthcoming VR headset versus something we pulled off the internet? You have to change how you think about classification. Without classification done comprehensively for all the data you care about and accurately, data security has no chance. And that is the Achilles heel of all data security solutions today.
And Dan, would you agree with that? Is that how you kind of see the market?
I think classification is super important, of course. I completely agree with that. I think that we have kind of a little bit of benefits, at least in my space, in the public cloud, because most of the data in the public cloud is machine generated. Mm-hmm. So machine-generated patterns are working a little bit better than SaaS applications that it's like a documents or Slack messages, right?
100%.
Yeah.
So in my space, classification is super important, but it's less of a challenge versus kind of SaaS applications. But I completely agree. I mean, I think if you tie it to compliance regulations, I think most organizations are looking to understand what data is kind of PII, PCI, PHI data, what data is regulated, and what data is sensitive only to them. And if you can crack kind of those 3 pieces over there, I think you have a good product that you can essentially build experiences on.
Yeah, it's helpful to hear that. I mean, it sounds like the spaces each of you operate in, it's very logical that a customer could have a solution from each one of you. Chinxi, anything you kind of add there? Is it if I have these 3 solutions as a CISO, am I set from a data security and governance standpoint?
I think, yeah, I mean, discovery, classification are really important, but I think we'll get there, right? When we move to more standardized infrastructure platforms like the cloud, we'll get more standardized data, and obviously you still have unstructured data there. AI can help. So I think data model will get there. So at some point, we'll largely understand what kind of data we have, and then if you postulate that we have standard infrastructure, then we can have standard way of integrating and tapping into the infrastructure to do protection, to do data movements and whatnot. But the problem is, we are, as an industry, we're building things very complex. Infrastructure is complex, applications complex, so there are a lot of ways that there's still challenges. I think working towards a more standardized infrastructure, more standardized way to build software, for instance, would help a lot. So I think software as a weak link in that whole chain will have to be fixed as well.
And from kind of this kind of collaboration standpoint, Howard, I mean, you've helped out in this capacity. I understand there's a data security maturity model you're trying to get the industry to rally around. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, so about 2 weeks ago, we launched V1 of the data security maturity model. It's the first industry community-developed framework for how organizations can assess their data security posture and build a roadmap for where they want to go with their business. And it's put together by, right now, a working group of 15 top CISOs. And it's available at datasecurity.org if you want to go check it out. But it kind of models after the NIST framework. And there are all these frameworks, the NIST, the CMMC, the MITRE ATT&CK framework. All of that stuff is focused on infrastructure. There's very little on data. So the data security maturity model is an attempt to create the first common language that all of us can use to talk about data security programs, for board of directors to evaluate the data security program within their industry, within their company, for companies to compare how they do against other companies in their industry. And we think it's going to have a lot of adoption. So yeah, the V1 is available at datasecurity.org. You can go check it out.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Dan, you came from Microsoft before this. We'll love to just learn more about how you see some of these kind of industry relationships. You talked about this model that's being developed. Are the cloud providers kind of leaning in and working with the startups, or just how do you see this kind of reference architecture and collaboration evolving?
So I completely agree that we need kind of an OWASP top 10 for like data security. OWASP top 10 essentially created the API security market, right? No one kind of knew what they needed to essentially protect themselves from. And I think an industry-created framework is super important, and I'm a big fan, by the way. So I think the big organizations usually lead these processes, but because they haven't, I think there will be adopters of a framework that will essentially pick up. I hope that this is going to be this framework. And eventually, at Microsoft, what kind of led me to this specific space, I just saw that as our customers kind of kept growing, they stopped having the visibility to what kind of data they owned, and they started kind of moving into this kind of multi-cloud era. And as they moved into this multi-cloud era, they actually lost more and more and more capabilities versus what they kind of had. And I was the one in charge of defining kind of the multi-cloud security strategy for Microsoft. How does Microsoft transition into this specific space? And everything translated. EDR.
Wait. Microsoft does multi-cloud?
Multi-cloud security.
Careful, this is recorded.
And as kind of tools essentially transition between Microsoft to another cloud. So we have EDRs that can essentially translate workload partition, can essentially translate, NDR can translate, CSPM can translate. Data security just didn't. So I think that's kind of why entrepreneurs like us are essentially building these different startups, one for like data protection, one for endpoint, one for cloud, to essentially help organizations gain back that control.
I'll take a different direction. We're running out of time here. Maybe Simon, I'll start with you. I mean, we talked a lot about, I think, some of the negative capacities and issues around kind of ransomware, these dollar figures, et cetera. Is there something you're excited about, that you're kind of optimistic about as you kind of look ahead the next year or two?
Yeah, this is going to sound very strange, but I'm actually excited that the government has started to realize that this is a problem. I think, a lot of people don't know this. We're one of the only nations in the developed world that doesn't have our cyber offense and defense under the same tent. In fact, all of our offense capabilities are in defense. All of our defense capabilities are left to IT. That is terrifying. And so I think that, one of the things that happened in the last 10 years is IT started to give up on dealing with shadow IT. They just started to say, like, okay, yeah, marketing will just use those things, I guess, that's okay. Maybe we'll use single sign-on. I think what's started to happen now, and I think, honestly, the downturn in the market, the changes in the macroeconomic environment, the fear, and the ransomware attacks have all led to educating people on this. They're going, this isn't going to work. I need these frameworks now to put my arms around things. I need to use, in our case, it's called our cloud, a platform that allows any SaaS service to actually be fully protected. But they're starting to actually reach in, lean in to educating themselves on how to protect the modern data estate. And that is a very, very good thing for our businesses, but it's also a very, very good thing for the world. Because I think unless we do that, we're going to keep seeing atrocious acts of ransomware attack. And again, just one last point there. I think you said earlier on, is this happening in other places? Well, it's not only happening in other places, the geopolitical risk dynamic is completely now digital. It's completely about cyber offense and defense capabilities. America, in particular, has to lead the way in protecting our nation and all of our other friendly nations, and sort of, tooting that horn and making it work.
So it sounds like it's positive. The government's getting more involved, taking this more seriously.
That's
and
right.
It sounds like a tremendous amount of user education
Yep.
is starting to occur.
And the board. I think the last piece of it is the boards now are taking action. They're holding CEOs accountable in the board meetings, and Jinsey will know more about this than I do. But what I'm hearing and seeing is CISOs are taking a more prominent role. They're holding the CIOs accountable, and I think that in turn is a very, very positive thing.
Awesome. Howard, what are you excited for the next year or two?
Look, I'm most excited that we're finally bringing real innovation to this problem. This market has been sleepy for a long time. A lot of people gave up on this category. You talk to CISOs, and like DLP was the kind of canonical category name for this problem, and you go ask CISOs about DLP, and they're like, "Oh, I've tried that 3 times. It's always failed. Don't talk to me about that." It's a 4-letter word. But we finally have real innovation, companies like Dig and Haiku and Cyberhaven, like bringing real innovation. For all of you as investors, these companies have been building for the last 5-10 years on a modern tech stack, able to solve the problem in a very modern way. And now we're starting to get the scale, and there are going to be some big winners created, and you're going to have opportunities to participate in some of these journeys.
Dan?
I'll echo Howard's. I think that the fact that we're getting kind of so much VC investment into this space, I think it creates tons of opportunities, both for the actual companies themselves, but also for kind of bringing evangelism into the space. Competition is good. Competition essentially creates markets. And if we have enough money essentially coming into competition, especially when we're trying to compete for this kind of CISO attention, right? CISO attention, they only do 3 projects a year. So when there's tons of marketing into a specific space, CISOs listen. CISOs look. Their security teams essentially push projects up. And I think these are kind of the next 2 years of data security. So I'm excited about it.
Jinxie, take us home.
As an investor, it's a very exciting market, and these are exciting companies. There are other exciting companies. That's all I'm going to say.
I love it. Well, we only got 45 seconds left here. We're between you and drinks. I just want to thank all the panelists for joining us. We hear that data security is a huge topic. It's going to be a big market in the future, and invite you to come up and say hey to anyone you're interested in. Thank you.